Between March 2020 and December 2020, American billionaires gained roughly $1 trillion in net worth. During those same 9 months, approximately 20 million Americans lost their jobs. Same country, same recession, completely different math. And the difference has nothing to do with luck, nothing to do with the rich being smarter, and nothing to do with them having some immunity to economic downturns. It has everything to do with a structural feature of how recessions actually work, a feature that turns every economic crisis into a quiet wealth transfer event that almost nobody clearly explains until now. The popular story about recessions is that they are bad for everyone. Markets crash, jobs disappear, businesses close, families struggle, and we all wait for things to recover. And in a narrow sense, that story is true. Most people do get poorer during a recession, but it leaves out the most important part of the story, which is that not everyone gets poorer. Some people get dramatically richer, and the mechanism by which they do is so reliable that historians can predict it every single time the economy contracts. And once you understand the mechanism, you'll realize that recessions are not the failures of capitalism. They are one of its core features. So it is time to learn how money works, to find out why every recession in modern history has reliably transferred wealth in exactly one direction. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that a recession is not a moment when wealth disappears. It is a moment when assets become cheap, because the people holding them are forced to sell. And the question of who is forced to sell versus who has the cash to buy is the entire game. When a recession hits, ordinary workers are usually the first to be cut. Layoffs happen at the bottom of the income ladder, because that is where corporate cost cutting is most efficient. A worker who loses their income typically has 3 to 6 months of savings, if they are lucky. After that, they have to sell whatever they own to cover rent, food, and medical bills. They sell their car at a discount. They sell their investments at the bottom of the market. They sell their house in a forced sale. They cash out their 401k early, taking a 10% penalty. On the other side of these transactions sits someone with cash on hand, buying the car, the stock, the house, the 401k assets at prices nobody would have accepted 6 months earlier. This is the fundamental mechanism of every recession. Liquidity flows from people who have wealth to people who are losing wealth, and assets flow in the opposite direction. Which brings us to problem number 2. During a recession, asset prices fall dramatically, but the underlying value of those assets, their ability to produce income, rent, or future cash flow, does not fall nearly as much. A house in 2009 was still capable of housing a family. A stock in a profitable company in 2020 was still going to pay dividends for decades. What changed in both cases was not the asset. It was the willingness of holders to keep them in a moment when they desperately needed cash. This gap between price and value is what professional investors call a buying opportunity. For everyone else, it is the moment when their life savings get permanently transferred to the people who had cash when it mattered. The 2008 housing crash created one of the largest wealth transfers in American history. Investment firms bought hundreds of thousands of homes at prices that working families had been priced out of for years. Those firms then turned those homes into rental properties and rented them back to the same families who had been forced to sell them. And this brings us to the third problem, which is by far the cruelest part of the cycle. After every recession, the economy eventually recovers. Asset prices rise, stocks return to previous highs, houses regain their value, and then some. The recovery, on paper, looks like a return to normal. But the assets that recovered are not held by the same people who held them before. The houses that crashed in 2009 and recovered by 2015 were held by very different owners in 2015 than they were in 2007. The stocks that crashed in 2020 and recovered by 2022 were held by very different shareholders in 2022. This is the part nobody tells you. A recovery is not a return to where you were. It is the moment your former wealth now visibly belongs to someone else. The full S&P 500 recovery from the 2008 crash took ordinary investors roughly 5 years. For families who had to sell at the bottom, that recovery happened in someone else's portfolio. Now here's the part nobody at any government policy desk really wants to say out loud. Modern recession response is structured specifically to support asset prices, not to support workers. Quantitative easing, low interest rates, liquidity injections are all designed to put a floor under markets, which means putting a floor under the people who own markets. The Federal Reserve will create trillions of dollars to support the S&P 500. The same Federal Reserve will tell workers that direct stimulus is inflationary and irresponsible. Both policies have the same goal: preserve the wealth of the people who already have it, and let the bottom of the ladder absorb the damage. The system isn't broken. It is working exactly as designed for the people who designed it. The fact that every recession quietly accelerates the concentration of wealth is not a bug. It is the actual function. So when someone tells you a recession is bad for everyone, they are not lying, but they are also not telling you the whole truth. A recession is bad for anyone forced to sell at the bottom. A recession is excellent for anyone with cash to buy. And the structure of the modern American economy ensures that those two groups get further apart with every cycle. The harder a recession hits, the more reliably wealth changes hands. And the more reliably, the people who had the wealth before end up with more of it after. That is not a conspiracy. That is just the math of an economy, where some people own assets, and most people only own their next paycheck. If you want to understand what the wealthy actually do in the months before a recession arrives, go and watch this video next. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.